Okay, good morning, and thank you for joining us for the 7th Annual Broadleaf Writers Conference. I'm going to give folks just another moment to enter the room, and before we get started, we have some housekeeping announcements to assure that we all have the best online experience. Okay, looks like we've got 19 in here, so okay. First of all, if you have any questions for our panelists during any of the sessions, please use the Q&A prompt that's going to be down at the bottom of your Zoom screen during the session. We'll attempt to address as many questions as time allows toward the end of the session, but feel free to ask your questions at any time. If you feel you might be in the wrong session, please, or you get curious about other sessions that might be happening now, links for the other sessions are in the program that you received prior to the conference. And Bill will be posting links in the chat during the event as well. And you can also check out Slack as well for some of those things. If you have a one-on-one pitch with an agent or a mentoring session, make sure to arrive 10 minutes before your scheduled time at the provided link to the one-on-one room so that our team can check you in. You're going to be great. So believe in yourself. We believe in you. Our official bookseller for the conference, once again, is Foxtail Bookshop. The titles from our writers and the recommended titles on writing, such as Stephen King's On Writing, can be found in the bookstore page on our website. That link will also be available in the chat and in the program. Foxtail will also be hosting our in-person Author Palooza event on October the 22nd at 1 p.m. Foxtail is up in Woodstock, Georgia. That'll be October the 22nd at 1 p.m., featuring several of the panelists here today and other special guests. The Broadleaf team will be hosting lunchtime chats with authors today and tomorrow. So just follow the link to the one-on-one room to join those. It will give you a chance to connect with more of our guests and our authors. We're also offering a pre-registration special for next year's conference right now. That link will also be in the chat, and you can find that in the program. And finally, you can also become a member or renew your membership when you pre-register for next year's conference. Additionally, as a growing nonprofit, we do rely on donations from our community to help fund the operations of the organization. So if you want to contribute, you can either do so when you pre-register or you can visit the donation page on our website. Okay, well, now that we've got that spoken for, welcome to this panel. We're going to be talking about different paths to publication. We're going to talk about indie publishers, big publishers. So first of all, let's meet your panelists today. We've got Marlena Frank, Peter Farris, and Evie Knight. For the audience members who aren't acquainted with you guys yet, would you mind just giving us a brief intro to yourselves, and then we'll jump into our conversation. Let's start with you, Marlena. I see you first here on my screen.
Sure, Daniel. My name is Marlena Frank, and I'm a young adult fantasy and horror author. I write everything from short stories to novellas to book series. I just really love all sorts of lengths of fiction.
Awesome. Peter.
Yeah, Peter Farris. I write crime and mystery fiction. New novel came out this year, and I'm based in north of Atlanta in Cherokee County, Georgia.
Evie.
Hi, I'm Evie Knight. I write adult horror fiction, most of the time what I consider feminist horror, focusing on strong female characters. I write novels, novellas, short stories. I just put out a novella that was published in July, and I live in Savannah, Georgia.
Savannah, Georgia is like the perfect city.
It is for
a writer.
For a horror author, especially.
Yeah.
Great place to be.
So before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty about the differences in publisher types, tell us what sort of publishers you personally worked with.
Well, I've worked with mostly small press and also done indie publishing as well. Never worked with Big Five, mostly just small press and that.
Same, small press and indie. I'm trying to get into the one of the big four, I guess now. But you know, it's a work in progress.
My first novel came out in 2012, the hardcover did, with on Forge Books, which is part of Macmillan. So at the time, Big Five. And then I had a 10-year gap between books in the United States. And my new novel came out with a publisher, an imprint called Arcade Crime Wise, which is a part of Skyhorse, which is technically independent, but has distribution through Simon & Schuster. So I've had two different experiences there with both of those.
So I'm going to get an education today as well as the audience. So Peter, you've gotten some experience with some of the bigger publishers. Can we speak to the difference between, you know, a small or indie publisher versus one of these big publishing houses?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you just talk sheer numbers, I guess, the way the big four are defined now. It's volume, how much do they sell, how much revenue every year. I think those are the metrics that sort of define them. And then independent publishers, their annual revenue is going to be smaller. They're going to publish less titles, fewer titles each year. But that's not a reflection of the quality of the work. There's a lot of great, what's become, I think, maybe replaced what was called the mid-list back in the day. I'm thinking in the crime and mystery world specifically, so forgive me, but there are great publishers out there operating in that zone now, and there are homes for writers, and they have major distribution through Penguin Random House or Simon & Schuster or whatever. So the quality of the work's still exceptional. There's great editing, great copy editing, great production going on. It's just they're smaller and they're not as widely they're still distributed, but they're not going to be all over the place as far as availability. But that's a whole other can of worms too. So that's the big thing, I think, is just metrics, you know, sheer volume and size, but not a reflection of quality. So.
All right. So for everybody here, let's start with you, Evie. What's one thing that you wish you had known before you had initially been published? On your experience with your publisher?
I think, and so first of all, I've had a wonderful experience with my publishers. There is nothing, I think, going back that I would do differently. I'm happy that I started out, I think, in a small press indie publisher, because it felt very, it was a very comfortable relationship. You know, it's more one-on-one than you might get with a traditional. I think the one thing maybe that I didn't realize was how much work as the author you're putting into the marketing and the you know, making sure that your book gets seen as much as it can. How much of the marketing part of it, you know, the social media, the pushing the book, that sort of thing that you have to step in and do, because they're small and they don't have that kind of budget. They'd love to do it for you and they're doing as much as they can, but you have to step in and do your part, which, you know, is a whole nother job. Like, it's a whole nother job beyond writing. And so I feel like maybe I wish I had known a little bit more about that, and maybe had a more broad social media thing going on before I published, so that I was already prepared to start putting it out there. So when the first time I published, I basically had a Twitter account and Facebook, and not, you know, a ton of followers, because it was just something I was doing, you know, socially and talking about my writing. I wasn't like really working to think about, you know, when is the best day to post something, and when is the best time, and how many followers I have. Those are things you really have to kind of have a foundation of, I think, in order to really be able to help in the marketing of your book when you go with a small publisher. That's something, at least, that I think about a lot, and even now, something I'm always trying to think about, keeping up with my social media accounts.
100%. And yeah, we actually have another panel today that's going to be talking about that. You know, you wrote a book, now what? And I think that's an interesting thing that we should be talking about, is like, you know, when you do have a publishing deal, where does that responsibility end and where do you have to pick it up? And I think it's probably going to be different, right, depending on the type of publisher you land.
Sure.
Peter, same question. What do you wish you'd known?
Yeah, it's on paper sounds like this sort of, fast track to success where my father was a writer and he was published for a long time by Tor Forge. And when I went through an apprenticeship period and wrote a couple terrible novels and finally wrote something that I think was publishable. My first novel is a bank heist novel, and my dad's longtime editor asked to see it. So I didn't even have an agent. So I showed it to him and he liked it. And after a little bit of time, offered me a book contract and wanted to publish it. And I thought, great, this is, you know, I've, there's this opportunity here. I'd be foolish not to take it. And if I could, and on paper, that sounds like great, my career is going to take off. If I could go back and do all of that over again, I would not have published that book that way at all. I would have taken the time to find the right agent for my work and hopefully try and put that book at a publisher that fits. Because one thing I wish to get to that, the point that I wish I had known is that when you're striving to publish at a high level, every publisher is different, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses, even Big Four at the time, Big Five. And some publishers have more prestige. Some of them are better on the marketing side. Some of them are better on the production side. And you really have to understand where your work fits and lives in this sort of crazy, nonsensical lottery that is, New York publishing. So I wish I had a better grasp on that, because I thought, hey, great, Forge is going to publish my book. I've got a chance to earn a readership and publish regularly. And none of that happened. And I was floundering for a decade. Thankfully, my work took off in France, but I wish I had known that back then. I would have done everything differently and not published that book with Forge when I did it. And then to Evie's point, social media, I am a total hermit. I can't stand this stuff. I yearn for the days when writers were invisible and it didn't matter who they were, what they did, or any of that stuff, but it's a necessity and you do have to understand it. And I'm a complete dum-dum with that stuff and still learning. And I wish I'd been more mature about it and had a better grasp of it 10 years ago. But I do it, and I'm glad I do it because I met so many wonderful people online, and you realize you're not alone, But if I could just live in this room and never talk to the outside world, I'd be totally happy.
Yeah. And Peter, can we drill down just a little bit more? You mentioned like figuring out where your work fits into the overall tapestry of the New York publishing house like paradigm. How do you go about figuring that out?
It's tough. You have to look at comps, like look at where your work lives. I'm just going to use crime and mystery fiction and like deep South noir, Southern noir, whatever, as an example. You look at peers and writers you admire. Where are they publishing? How are their books being marketed? Who reps them? You go to the acknowledgments, find out who their agent is, and then you can start to strategize. Like if your work is at that level and you think it belongs there, you have to think about, where can I get this to, starting with an agent. And you hope that agents have their strengths and weaknesses too, as far as they might have a pipeline at a certain publisher, but stuff they submit over here, it's a black hole and they never hear back. So there are all these variables. And I think that's what drives the sort of failure rate in publishing, is that writers have to make compromises because we are desperate little sad people trying to publish. And there is the perfect agent out there for you and the perfect publisher, probably with the perfect publicist, but to have all those stars align, you got a better chance winning the lottery. So you've got to think about trying to think, where does my work live best and what publisher, and just strive to try and get it there somehow, some way. And then from there, you might have to just start moving down the list once the rejections start rolling in, and they inevitably will. Yeah, I'll wrap this up because I'm rambling. There is a perfect publisher for your work, but making that happen is like, is the real challenge for writers out there.
Marlena.
So kind of piggybacking on what Evie and Peter said, I will also say that marketing was one of those things that I wish I understood how important that was ahead of time. But adding to that, I think, especially since I've been moving from small press towards indie more, the power of a mailing list is can't be understated. Doesn't matter what level, I would say publishing you're in, your mailing list is very important because those are people who are subscribed directly to you. You don't have them through Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or anything like that. You control that list and you control what content gets put out there. I think that's very important, and I've been realizing over the last few years how important that can be.
Yeah, I will echo that. For anybody really in any industry, if you're relying on social media alone to build an audience, what happens to that audience if Facebook suddenly changes the rules of engagement, or Instagram or Twitter? You know, having your own email list, your own mailing list is one very important plank for
And
stability.
yeah, and adding on to that, Daniel, I think it was 2019. I was doing amazingly well on Instagram, and over the last few years, they've changed their algorithm dramatically to the point that it's really hard for writers and photographers to get noticed on there as easily. And that's been discussed at length in the creative worlds. But that's something that can happen to any platform, and you have to be aware of that as a writer because this is your business and your baby, and you want to treat it right. So.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, you know, that speaks to the whole pay to play paradigm with social media as well. You know, they shuffle the deck and the algorithm changes, and you suddenly no longer have the same access at free. So somebody brought up a really good question here in the Q&A. Do agents ever work with small presses?
Yeah,
I would say yes. There
I
are
would
several.
think, yeah.
There've been a few authors I've spoken to who have gone with agents, and they do end up going with small presses. Some small presses that I've been with, the authors who were there, they had open submissions, but they also had agented submissions to that small press. So.
Yeah, I'll agree too. I'm thinking in my crime mystery sandbox that, you know, there's great independent publishers out there like Soho and Crooked Lane and a few others, and agents absolutely work with them. Now, small press, you get into the granular detail of on that spectrum, I guess, you know, some agents might, because it's not worth their time, or, you know, they want to make money, won't bother. Others are building their list and just are invested in you, and they absolutely will approach them. So it's really your mileage will vary deal with a lot of agents, whether they're willing to do that or not, you know.
And so whether we're going the agent route or soliciting directly to publishers, is there anything you can share about how to approach trying to secure a publisher?
I would say do your research on who you're submitting to. Make sure you know the names of the people if they have that publicized anywhere, because that adds a personal touch to whatever your query is going to be, whether it's to an agent or a publisher. Also, make sure that you've researched what kind of books they publish. Peter mentioned this earlier, but you need to know if the style of book that you're writing fits with the kind of brand of the publisher and the kinds of books that they publish. If you're submitting a mystery to a small press that mostly does, you know, fantasy and romance, they, you know, you're not going to have a good chance with it, even if that's a dream press for you. It's just, you know, try to fit your brand and the style of your writing in with what press you're or agent you're aiming at.
Mhm. And I think beyond that, like when you were talking about personalization, I think it's always good to try to go to conferences, things like this, where, you know, maybe, you know, keep an eye out on what, if you have a publisher, a dream publisher, you have a dream agent, something like that, keep an eye on where they're going to be, and, you know, go there and meet them, because face-to-face interactions a lot of times will elicit a lot more, you know, success than just, you know, send us out an email. They know you and you talk to them, and they might be like, hey, yeah, send me some pages, you know, and all of a sudden you kind of slid in the back door, and that's a great way to do it. So meeting them and talking to them and getting to know these people is an amazing way to do it.
Yeah, to Evie's point, I was just in September at VoucherCon in Minneapolis, and I saw that time and time again. new writers making connections with agents who then ask, send me, a partial, send me your manuscript. I was, I'm looking, my new novel's coming out in France next year, but I once again don't have a US publisher. And I find myself the first night in Minneapolis sitting down to dinner that I was just randomly invited to with a new acquisitions editor at a major publisher. And we just talked over dinner, and he asked me about France. And then he says, have your agent send me your manuscript. And that was just a random connection made first night in town. And it goes to show the upside to going, and you don't want to punish these people, but you can network and make forge relationships, and then editors put a name with a face because they remember you from the hotel bar or that little moment, and they're like, oh yeah, and they'll be receptive to that submission, and that's special, and that's why it's worth the investment and going. And I hate doing it, but I'm glad I did.
We're all introverts, like we all hate it, and we know we have to do it.
Yeah, I cringe. It's like, I don't know how to work a room. I'd rather stand in a corner.
I know. I'm the same. And you're like, oh, I gotta do this. I have to do it. You
got to put yourself out there. Like there's no other option. So.
100%, and it's so cringy sometimes to have to walk around and put your hand out and meet people, because I would rather just implode into dust, have to meet strangers. All right, so we have another good question here, and I'm pretty sure I have an answer for it, but I would like to hear y'all speak to this, because what I'm hearing in this question is perhaps a mindset issue. If an agent doesn't seem to be the perfect fit for you, but they're the only one interested, should you go with him or hold out?
I'll jump in if y'all want to hear, because I've got some agent stories, but there's this failure rate, this failure dynamic that drives publishing in this country, that is different to my experiences in publishing in France. But it's because writers have to make compromises. There is a perfect agent for you out there, but they may be going through a divorce, or they hit the lottery with another client and they're on a beach in Tahiti, or they just don't care. They don't answer emails. Like, you just don't know. So then you get that perfect agent passes for whatever reason, you start going down your list, and you wind up with maybe the less than ideal agent, but you're desperate. So you're like, I need somebody. I've been looking for an agent for 2 years or whatever. And so that starts this sort of failure snowball. And then that agent has good relationships at certain publishers, but not others. And so they get your book and they place it somewhere that maybe is less than ideal. And an editor buys it, but then they're gone next year because the turnover rate's crazy in New York, and editors come and go like, which way's the wind blowing. And so all of a sudden some editor has your book and they didn't buy it and they don't really care. And then the publicity department doesn't really care. And it's one of like a million books that come out that week. And just an example, but like, that's how this snowballs, and then why your book disappears after 1 or 2 weeks, and you don't publish again for 10 years, which is kind of like what happened to me. I had what I thought was a great agent 10 years ago at a huge outfit in New York, and he shot Devil Himself, my new book that came out this year, to 6 publishers in September of 2013, and they all passed because of sales of my first novel, not because of the quality of the work. And then that agent proceeded to just basically check out on me and ghost me for the next 7 years. Devil Himself came out in France and was a big success. It won awards. It sold well. That made no impact on this particular agent. They just, at this point, they didn't care. So I was, what I thought was like, well, I've got the right tools in place to get this book published in English again. And it didn't work out at all. So in retrospect, I realized like this wasn't the right agent for me. Just to go back to your question, I'm rambling again, but it's hard because writers are desperate, and you have to make compromises constantly. And that's a hard thing to accept when that perfect agent is not with you, or you might have the perfect agent, but they're not engaged with your work at all. And you can lose years. You can lose years if that situation happens to you. That's what happened to me. I had years go by where I just had I had an agent technically, but he wasn't trying to get me published anywhere. So, it's just a little warning from a cynical, bitter writer.
Any other thoughts about this agent conundrum, to settle or not to settle?
Well, I would definitely go with Peter's advice. Sounds like he's
Yeah,
been around for
yeah,
these kind of
he's the
things
one.
more. But that's a tough decision though when you're in a situation
Mhm.
and your manuscript is tied up. I have not had that with agents, but I have had that with different publishers and
Right.
things. And that's frustrating. Like I had a publisher that I'd had a contract with for I want to say 4 years or so, 5 years, and then they just suddenly reorganized recently. Had a new publisher, new owner come in, and they cut like half the authors off their listing, and that happens. And
Mhm.
it's just like, okay, how do you deal with that? How do you
Mhm.
pick up the pieces and make sure your career and your books are handled properly?
Mhm.
So I have a couple of questions that people have raised specifically for Peter. First of all, Peter, did you break it off with that agent?
Yeah, after it was like I was with that outfit for 7 years and gave that particular agent several manuscripts, and I could tell just, this person wasn't engaged at all. What was frustrating was my career took off in France. The Devil Himself was published in 2017, 2018 over there, and was published very well, received very well, and it afforded me this incredible privilege to have kind of a readership over there now. And I'll have now my fourth novel comes out next year, and I'll be going back over for a book tour. And I really got lucky there. But yes, I broke it off. There was film interest in The Devil Himself, and after everything that happened in France, had made no impression on this particular agent. In 2020, I just said, I just parted ways with that agent. And I'd been looking for other agents at the time on the sly because I needed to find a new rep if I ever wanted to publish in the United States again. And fortunately, I was introduced to an agent that I'm with now by the director attached to the Devil Himself film project. And that agent was also a writer first, and he's been fantastic to work with. He replies to emails, quickly. He calls when he says he's going to call, like to the minute, which is unheard of in the agent world. Like, I'm just shocked. Like, and he's just responsive and engaged, and he cares, and he wants to try and get me to publish regularly again in English. So yeah, it took 7 years for me to finally just cut ties with that particular agent. But I thought I'd never publish in English again. I was about to quit many times on The Devil Himself, and it took nearly 10 years to get it published in English. It was done in 2013, and it's been sitting around, until this year.
Wow.
So it was a journey for sure.
Okay, so I want to kind of shift gears slightly to talk a little bit more about distribution, and then to kind of swing back to marketing for some other questions here. Peter, can you talk a little bit about being published by a smaller publisher and then having those distribution channels through these larger publishers?
Yeah, the upside with Devil Himself and Arcade Crime Wise was distribution. They're just part of the Penguin Random House distribution network. So the book's available everywhere, which is nice. You can tell people, yeah, you can get it here or there. Booksellers can order it, and that's great. One side, of course, is just zero marketing at all. In my case, the book was produced well, edited exceptionally well, and that was all fantastic experience. But as far as getting the book reviewed, helping on the publicity side, it's just there was none of that. It was entirely up to me, and I failed really on that. I was kind of scrambling in the weeks prior to the publication of it to pump the book up with stuff. So that was a challenge. But the fact that the book is widely available is a huge benefit to being with a publisher that's part of a larger distribution network, for sure.
So this one's for everybody. Given that our publishers are going to go so far, and given that the rest is going to be up to us, do any of you have experience with hiring a social media manager or somebody else, to work with you or for you to help promote your work?
I just did right before the novella. It's 3 Days in the Pink Tower. Before it came out, I did. It was actually someone that had worked with my publisher, so works with and for the publisher who published my 2 novels. And she had done a nice job, and I had kind of reached out to her and said, hey, listen, you know, I have a day job that keeps me quite busy beyond this, and it's going to be really hard for me to juggle the social media on this, and I really want to get this book out there. And what, you know, do you have any suggestions? Can you refer me to somebody? And she said, you know, I think I could take it on for you. And it has been, for me, I've seen a huge difference in just having her there to help make sure that I'm getting posts out daily. Like, she'll send me an email and just say, hey, you know, if you go on this trip, if you go to this conference, make sure you send me pictures. I'll post them for you while you're at the conference. I'll, you know, if you, anywhere you go, anything you do, make sure you let me know. She's updated my website for me. So she keeps a lot of things going, and I've seen a huge difference in interest on this book versus previous books. And so it's been really, really great and totally worth the money for me, because I have a day job, because I have another thing that keeps me super busy. And like Peter had mentioned, like, I'm old. So like getting on all these different social medias and keeping up with like all of these new things and where everyone is at the moment is really super hard for me. And also, I don't ever feel like I'm so interesting that I have something to say every day, but she always manages to find something great and post it, even if it's just a funny meme related to writing or horror or something. And so it's absolutely priceless for me. That's my take on it.
Awesome. Yeah. I can't imagine trying to do it all.
Yeah.
Marlena.
I haven't hired anyone like that, but I've heard of people, friends of mine, who have. And not only can they help with social media aspects like that, they can also assist with submitting for promotions for various like Kobo and Barnes and Noble and all that stuff for you. You can also get their help with submitting to smaller paid newsletters, which is, if you're indie, that's a huge strategy, especially if you're a wide author. You know, having them just submit on a certain schedule, and you just have a budget that they use for that. You know, there's lots of ways that you can use someone who can be hired to assist you along the way. And it's not just with social media. You know, when you start digging into what you don't want to do as an author, that can be a pretty long list, and that'll help you free you up for more writing time.
And I think that's a good point. Sorry, that's a good point. I think too is what don't you want to do? You know, if there's something you enjoy doing, like if you love social media, don't pay somebody to do that for you. Pay somebody to help you with your distribution. Pay somebody to help you, you know, put your entries in for award things and stuff like that. Find out what, you know, you don't just have to hire somebody and be like, okay, you do what you do. Find the person that works for what you don't want to do or don't have time to do.
Yeah, I'd add, I know some writers personally who have spent the money on a big New York publicist. You know, they've spent $15,000 or $20,000 on a publicist, and for a particular book release, and you know, it will manufacture recognition for the book. I don't say that cynically, but it kind of amounts to that. You know, like, you know, sure, you'll be in the New York Times and you'll be in newspapers and magazines and on a morning news show or something. And that's cool. You know, I'd love that. I'd love to show my mom, like, look, Mom, I'm in the New York Times, right? But I also know directly that it hasn't translated to sales in every instance. And I know writer friends on the whole spectrum, whether it's investing a little bit in more of like a social media management type scenario or a book club at route, or full on expensive New York publicist that's going to get you like in every newspaper in the country and your book reviewed everywhere and all that jazz. And again, I know from personal talking to folks and friends of mine that the prestige is nice and recognition, and it elevates your profile as a writer if you're willing to spend that money, but it hasn't translated to sales in every instance. So there is a trade-off there, and it's a risk and a gamble you're going to have to make for yourself, depending on where you're at in your career, how you're publishing and where you're publishing. So, and I haven't done it yet personally. I just write for France, to be honest with you. My publisher over there told me, like, look, Pete, do social media. We don't care. your job is to write. Our job is to sell books. Okay. And my head exploded when he told me that. I'm like, really? And because we don't have that in the United States anymore. You know, that world does not exist like it does overseas.
So Peter, we got somebody DM'd me a question. For this French market that you're working in, how does that work? Are you writing directly in French, or are you sending your work to a translator? How does that get done?
Yeah, no, my publisher, Editions Gallmeister, I've done 4 books with them. They acquired the book in English. Yeah, I know 2 words in French, merci madame and oui, so that's 3. No, I've worked with the same translator for all 4 books too. Anatole, he's become like family to me. He just finished my new book, which is out next year. And yeah, it's been a great relationship. I got lucky because luck is a huge part of all this. No, I write in English and then they translate it for me.
And so, since you don't know the language, is there a degree of like just like assumed trust, like that they're doing their due diligence to get like the right idiomatic expressions and like the like really the tone of your work to translate as best as possible?
Yeah, my translator Anatole, we've done 4 books together now, and he's also translated. My publisher over there specializes in American writers from the American West, the Deep South, all over the country, but that's their niche. And Anatole has translated books by other Southern writers. And so it's funny, if you see the emails we were just exchanging over the past month, as he's asking, my books are set in the Deep South, like in South and Middle Georgia, stuff about deer hunting and hog hunting and the natural world and habitat and landscape features. And I think he does an exceptional job. I mean, I always joke he knows my work better than I know it myself, because he really gets into granular detail to make those translations accurate for a French reader. And we have to make compromises here and there, but I have total faith in what they're doing. I joke too that like he makes me look like I know what I'm doing to French readers, when in fact I totally have no clue what I'm doing. So
I wanted to
No, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add real quick, don't underestimate foreign markets when you're looking at sales, like Peter's proved here. I've heard that Germany especially is a market that once you can get in there, they are very, lots of readers over there that like a variety of genres. That's a big deal over there. And, I know in the US we struggle with that sometimes. It's more of a uphill battle here sometimes. But don't ever underestimate, foreign markets. And if you have someone who reaches out and they're like, hey, I love your work, send me a PDF of one of this book, because this is what we're interested in looking at. That's pretty legit usually. Do research on whoever sends you the email out, obviously, but that's usually how they reach out for those kinds of books. So
I could add too, if you're out there and you're searching for an agent, for example, one thing to look for, in addition to who do they work with, where have they set books up, and does your book fit into kind of what they're on their wavelength, is do they have a foreign rights department? Is it a bigger agency, or do they sub agent out? And what have those foreign agents done? Because there's opportunity there, especially in France, if crime fiction especially is huge over there. And I got very lucky. I was with a big agency in New York for many years, and the one upside was that they had a great foreign rights sales agent in Paris, and she walked into this publisher's office and said, you need to read Peter's work. And he bought my first 2 books. And then I was about to quit and give up, because years were going by and I was just like not publishing anywhere. It changed my life. I got to go over there several times on book tours and to cultivate a readership over there, all because of something I wrote, and that's really special. And that relationship with Gallmeister is precious to me, because I'm so lucky that happened, considering I've been unlucky on a lot of other stuff on the writing side of things. So.
Evie, we have a question for you. Hanlon says, I think you mentioned moving from small presses more toward indie presses. Is the size of the press the difference there? I guess I've conflated the two. So yeah, when we say a small press versus indie press, are we making a different, or denoting a difference there?
I think it's just, and maybe Marlena can speak to that too. Whether, I don't know really what the exact definition difference is between them. It's just some some that identify as a small press and some that identify as an independent or an indie press. I think sometimes it's size and Marlena, do you?
Yeah,
I mean,
so
I guess size is what I kind of thought about.
size, but also a lot of the really small presses don't have distribution.
Yeah, that's true.
So basically, if they publish through Ingram, you have Ingram's extended distribution there. But more than that, I think, and you have some that are considered small presses, like Entangled Publishing, for example, which is pretty big. But they're still considered, I believe, small to mid-sized press, again, because of the size of the authors, the number of authors that they have under their belt. Indie is more like someone who's, in my opinion, indie is more like someone who's publishing it themselves, someone who's going out and hiring the editor, the cover artist. But you do hear small and indie tend to be kind of switched a lot, depending on the audience that you're talking to. So it really just depends.
So yeah, I can't give you an exact definition. I can only say that some that I have worked with have considered themselves indie and some small. So
yeah.
Is there a difference? No, I think it is just about, again, doing your research and looking into it, what they've put out, how that's done, what they've distribution wise and things like that.
Yeah, I was with one publisher who the owner was the one who was actually the cover artist as well. So like when you have one person who's doing several roles like that, that's a small press doing that kind of work. So
yeah, I had a novella put out by one like that, very small press. 2 co-owners, one was doing the cover art, and it was good. I maybe didn't get as much of a distribution or marketing as I was hoping for that book, but it was still nice because it was truly constant one-on-one. You were really part of the whole process from beginning to end, because you're almost like they've just take you in. You're part of the team with those couple people. Whereas in a little bit bigger, when you get into the bigger presses that are still small, not one of the big 5, 4. Sometimes you get a little communication and then things take off, and you may not have as much say in the cover. Like with the small press I work with, we were back and forth on the cover, like, oh, could you change this? I'd like to see this, versus some of the bigger small presses or indie presses where, hey, here's your cover, and you're like, oh, that's great. But I've been lucky. I don't want to say anything, but like there's one I had absolutely zero input on, like, this is your cover, here it is. And I've had ones where I've had input, and then also I've had ones where it's like, is there anything you're absolutely, you just hate about it? Otherwise, we're going with it. So I've had a lot of input, and I've had no input, and everywhere along the spectrum. So just things like that.
Yeah, and I will say one of the benefits of being in a small press is that not just, the one-on-one interaction you have a lot of times with the publisher, but the community of fellow authors that you're usually with. You usually have some kind of, chat group or something that you can actually collaborate on. That's how I got to a lot of the shows my first year I had my debut novel out. We pulled together resources, went to BookCon and got a booth up there in New York. We went to Decatur Book Festival and had 2 booths all dedicated to, authors from that publishing house. And we all worked together to kind of lift each other up. So that's a community that you get from that can be really useful.
So we got another question about some of this nomenclature. Are hybrid publishers considered indie? First of all, can we define what hybrid is? I've never heard of this person.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think they're talking about the co-op publishers, where it's basically run by authors, and authors are the people publishing it. Basically, it's a collaborative, right? So everyone who's an author, like let's say on an anthology, they're all helping to promote it. They're all helping to market it. Some of them do the editing, and so it's basically a big team project that they're putting together, and they slap the publishing name on it. So it's underneath that umbrella. I don't know if that's quite what they're talking about with hybrid.
That's really interesting. And to piggyback on that, can you recommend any resources as a group where we might go to look for independent, indie, small, all of these things? Where would we go to find out is there a like a database or a list out there, or some resources we could check out?
Yeah, so I can give some advice for people interested in indie publishing. There's several Facebook groups that I've been lurking on for years that have been quite helpful. 20 books to 50K. That one is very useful, especially if you're aiming for Amazon only as your main publishing, format. One of the ones I really like is Wide for the Win. That one is great. They give you all sorts of advice, and they have people who you can ask to help give you advice specifically on your author career, giving you ideas about how to better market your books across various distributors and platforms. So that one's great.
Mhm. I think anytime you look at, depending on your genre, so I'm speaking from my experience as a horror writer, but getting online and just looking for submissions. There's different groups on Facebook and things that are like horror submissions, and then that a lot of times those are the smaller presses that are looking for submissions. And the other thing I did when I first started was get a subscription to Duotrope, because it would send you a weekly newsletter with all of the open submission calls and the different publishers looking at it. And that way, at least you can start, you're seeing these publisher names, you can start looking into them. And that was a good place to go to. And it was definitely worth the subscription.
And I think with Duotrope, you can filter for the types of things you're looking
Yes.
at.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Mm-hmm. And you can actually, if you get a subscription, you can keep track of where you submitted to and the results of that. So it has your own little sort of page that you can keep track of your own personal progress and who you've submitted and what you've submitted and when and things like that. So that's a good one to get.
For those of us out there who may need something like Amazon, what are your thoughts on Amazon as a distribution channel? Friend or foe is what I put in the notes. So maybe the answer to that is yes.
Exactly.
Well, I see them as someone that you work with, like you would Barnes and Noble if you're, indie, obviously, or Kobo or any of those. They can be really difficult to work with, and a lot of times their policies are not very author friendly. Like it's really hard to make a book free over there. You have to go through a bunch of channels just to make something free. So there's just some extra hurdles you have to do with Amazon. But most of the readers that I see are on Amazon, the digital at least.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was just gonna say. That's where they go, right?
that's the biggest chunk of the pie. So you gotta go where your readers are, even if it's painful to work with.
Yeah, I have some friends, writer friends, and some who were actually even worked and published by Amazon at Thomas and Mercer, their crime mystery thriller imprint. They are ambivalent about their experiences. There's some amazing and some frustration too. On the publishing side, I've just always been ambivalent about sales, because part of me is like, I don't want to tell anybody where to buy my book. Like, go buy it from wherever you want. I'd love for you to go down to your local independent bookseller and order it from them, but I understand the convenience of Amazon. And I have friends in publishing who think Amazon is the only bookstore that matters now, and will be until, a sweet meteor of death comes and destroys us all. So, I still haven't been able to wrap my brain around what I think of Amazon, other than I'm not going to tell people where to buy their books, and I just hope make that choice for yourself. And I like to keep my opinions to myself on a lot of stuff like that, because what does it matter ultimately? I can say in France, though, the reason they have a thriving bookseller community, to be a bookseller over there is a noble profession. And they have, I think in Paris alone, there's 160 bookstores. And it's because their government, there are laws on the books that basically fix the amount of discounting Amazon and other huge big box retailers can do over there. So that's 5%, if I understand correctly. So your independent bookseller in your little town, village, or neighborhood, Amazon is not going to undercut them on a new book. So people just prefer to go to their local bookseller. And it is in their DNA buying books over there. They absolutely love it. They champion writers, and Amazon can't run them all out of business, like unfortunately what we see in the United States. So when I see that, I do start to feel a little bit of sort of bile rising in my throat about Amazon and what they've done to publishing in this country. But it's too big and complicated. I'm a caveman and I just don't understand this stuff. So.
So for one more big question that we could maybe try to tackle here, which is, you know, say that you're entertaining an offer from a publisher. What are some things that you look for, either like cautiously or excitedly, in a contract? Or is this just like pass it over to the lawyer and
Well, I mean, you can do review for yourself if you see stuff in there that looks suspicious to you, and you're like, I'm not quite sure what this means, but this doesn't feel like it's in any of those example contracts that you can get from a lot of the writing organizations. I think SFWA has it, HWA I know has it. You can see what the preferred language is for contracts. And so when you don't see that listed, you can actually go to, there are, here in Georgia, you've got the Georgia Lawyers for the Arts, which you can reach out to, and they will do, I think it's for a nominal fee, but they have lawyers who will do a pro bono review of your contract for you. I've had to use them before, unfortunately, for a contract that was very sus. And they agreed it was extremely sus. So that one didn't go through, and they ended up going under shortly after that fell through. So, but you know, if you need to have it reviewed, there's a lot of other resources too out there. I know Ally is one that's really good, has a lot of good lawyers for reviewing those suspicious contracts.
I think
to go back on that, should we assume that all contracts are suspicious and vet them?
Yes, one word.
I mean, I don't know if from my experience with a lot of the, again, small and independent presses, a lot of times the contracts are really straightforward and super easy to read, even from a non-legal person standpoint. So most of them I have felt very comfortable, like Marlena said, just looking at what a normal contract should look like, reading through them, the words, everything was very straightforward. But yeah, I think as soon as it starts being a little confusing, or if you're reading it, you're like, what even does this mean? That's when you have to stop and take a moment and have somebody else look at it. Another thing I was thinking is looking at what all you're signing a contract for. I mean, is it just, you know, paper book rights, or is it international? Is it audio? Is it, you know, there's gaming rights, you know, to your story, things like that. So what all is included in this contract? What all, and what percentage from each of those things are you getting? Because it can be different depending on, like, it's an ebook, it's a paperback, it's a hardcover, and then you've got your international, your, you know, your audio, all of that. And for how long, you know, how long do they hold those rights?
And do they need them?
And do they need them? Because are they even doing that? Are they just trying to scoop up everything so no one else can do it? So those are things I think you need to take a look at as well.
Yeah, I'll add to Evie's point that there are specifics in the few term sheets I've seen. It's like, look at what rights they want, especially internationally. You know, if you're writing in a genre that does well internationally, and a publisher wants world rights, for example, but you look at their track record and they don't seem to be selling any books in France or Germany or Italy or places where you might have opportunity. You know, you might not want to give those rights away. And look at the royalty rates, and look at the length of term that they're offering too. And most of this stuff winds up being pretty boilerplate. And the sketchy sus publishers, you know, the word gets around. And if you're fortunate, you either have an agent or you consult with an attorney or some of these great resources out there, they'll, you know, some red flags will be pretty apparent right out of the gate. But the main thing is just kind of knowing where your work lives in today's sort of publishing environment, and knowing, like, you know what, like gaming rights is a great example. If you're a sci-fi or fantasy writer, you might want to retain those because you never know what opportunities might come down the pipe. And giving them to a publisher who's going to do nothing with them and tie them up could be detrimental to you down the road. So.
Yeah, and another good resource to look at if you get an offer from a publisher, especially during these pitch seasons on Twitter and stuff, you can double check them with Writer Beware. That's a really good resource, obviously, to verify that they're a decent publisher too. And as you read more and more contracts, whether it's through short stories or with novels, you'll start to get a feel for what's pretty boilerplate and what's out of the norm, and you need to double check with someone first. So yeah.
So we have 5 more minutes, and I think we have more questions than time. So lightning round question. Have you used a pen name? And if so, how do agents react to that?
I do. The Evie Knight is a pen name. And I have never, ever had an issue with it, ever. I just tell them this is my pen name. And then when you're signing a contract, you sign it with your legal name, and usually AKA or / your pen name. But I have never, ever had a problem with it. But I need to, because my day job, I'm a physician, and so I write horror, and it just seems like a really bad mix to have some really gory things in your books and then go in and be like, hi, I'm going to be delivering your baby. So for me, it was really important from the very start to keep these two lives separate. And every publisher that I've worked with totally gets it, understands it, and it's just a non-issue. It's just, when I get my payment, they go to my account, but it isn't an issue for me.
Good advice. A last question here. How do you get people to write reviews? ? Any suggestions? So I think this is probably a question about launching a book. I think it's good to, recruit a launch team who, like your advanced readers, your friends, your network, your family, to get in there and leave a review on Amazon, Goodreads, wherever. But beyond that, do you guys have recommendations on how to encourage reviews to get, captured beyond the launch phase?
Beg,
best practices,
and cry and
spend $20,000 on a publicist.
Right? Yeah,
spending a lot of money.
I've gone with Book Sprout recently. I've been trying that out. They did a whole site reorganization though, right after I got in, and it's been a lot harder to get reviewers on there. But the ones who are on there are like really dedicated reviewers, and like they pick up every book I put up there. I've heard NetGalley works well. I've had mixed because you have to pay so much to get into NetGalley. They do have areas where you can pay like $50 to put your book up for a month. If you Google around for that, you can usually find places that are having that available for people. But it's hard to get reviews. That's a struggle. Just remind readers, hey, this came out 2 months ago. Don't forget to put a review up.
It would be super cool. It would
Yeah.
be really good of you.
Yeah, my publisher used NetGalley, and only thing I had on my book that came out in May, Devil Himself, was word of mouth. Like Publishers Weekly reviewed it, and that was cool, but all the other trades ignored it. Crime Mystery Scene pretty much ignored the book. So I didn't have those sort of third-party reviews that can help pump a book up, which are great to have, but there's a lot of politicking that goes into that stuff. And who your publisher is and their prestige or lack thereof can influence all that stuff. And so I just basically begged people like, hey, reviews are huge, and I hate to punish you with this, but thank you. And please leave those reviews on Amazon, because it'll help elevate the book, because all I have is word of mouth, and I've lived and died by it this year. And that's cool, but that's the way it is. That's the stark reality of things.
So Marlena, Peter, Evie, thank you so much for your time this morning and sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us. This has been a lovely conversation. We are out of time, so we're going to close it up here. If you have more questions for your authors, hang around, come to the next panel, find us in Slack, and we will see you guys at 10:45 for the next session. All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.